You can almost see him now, not the monstrous, swollen figure from his final years, but a young man glowing with promise, moving through sunlight like it belongs to him. You're standing in the palace courtyard and everything smells faintly of leather, horse sweat, and crushed mint. The year is somewhere around 1509. You can hear the bells, the laughter, the rustle of silk. England is waking to a new king, Henry Tudor, the second of his name. And you're right there, watching him step into history with the confidence of someone who hasn't yet learned that everything he loves, he will eventually destroy. He's only 17 and already everyone adores him. The people cheer, the courtiers bow too low. The poets invent flattering metaphors faster than they can sharpen their quills. Even now, if you could scroll through their minds like an Instagram feed of the Tudor age, you'd see nothing but admiration. Radiant prince, warrior poet, the golden boy who will bring England glory. He plays the lute, writes poetry, and wrestles in the courtyard for fun. Because why not? When you're Henry VIII at 17, you don't sweat, you shine. But here's the thing they don't put in most history books. He wasn't supposed to be king. His older brother, Arthur, yes, named after the legendary one Excelentra, was the heir. Arthur had already been married to a Spanish princess, Catherine of Aragon. Their union was supposed to bind two great Catholic powers together. But Arthur died young, possibly of the sweating sickness, possibly of something more mysterious. People still argue. The details blur in that Renaissance way where truth and gossip share the same bed. And so, in an instant, young Henry, who was destined for the church, not the throne, suddenly inherited both a crown and a complicated Spanish widow. Now this is where the story starts to smell faintly of scandal and incense, because the teenage Henry eventually marries his late brother's wife. Yes, you heard that right, after receiving a special papal dispensation. The church had to officially say, sure, it's fine, she's technically pure enough for you. Awkward, right? You can almost imagine the medieval group chat lighting up. Even centuries later, historians still debate whether Catherine and Arthur's marriage was ever truly consummated. Some believe her claim of innocence. Others suspect she lied to protect herself and her new position as England's queen. You're sitting there, watching them kneel at the altar. The air smells of lilies and candle smoke. He looks at her with that bright, ambitious love that burns too fast. She's 6 years older, mature, devout, calm, and for a while she's everything he needs. The mother figure, the moral compass, the gentle hand on the shoulder of a boy king who has no idea how much power he's holding. For a few golden years, they actually seem happy. The kingdom hums with peace, and Henry writes sonnets about virtue and destiny. People call them England's golden couple. But behind the pageantry, there's always the ticking of an invisible clock, that royal pressure to produce a son. You can almost hear it, can't you? That quiet little metronome beneath every smile. Heir, heir, heir. Catherine gives birth multiple times, but one by one the children are stillborn or die in infancy. Only a daughter survives, Mary. And for Henry, that's a heartbreak wrapped in humiliation. He adores his little girl. But in his world, love isn't enough. Lineage is everything. He looks at Catherine, still gentle, still praying, and starts to see failure in her devotion. It's strange how you can feel his restlessness across the centuries, that creeping dissatisfaction that starts as a whisper and grows louder every year. You know that feeling when something perfect begins to bore you, not because it changed, but because you did? That's Henry. Except most people deal with it by getting a new hobby, not by breaking an entire religion. And here's the weird detail no one really talks about. Henry was deeply superstitious. He believed in divine signs, omens, and the spiritual math of sin and punishment. When his sons kept dying, he started to see it as God's disapproval, a curse for marrying his brother's widow. Late at night, he'd pace his chambers, muttering prayers. Half king, half terrified boy. Some records say he even refused to sleep until he'd read a passage from Leviticus about brothers and wives and forbidden unions. You can almost picture it, the candle guttering, the room heavy with guilt and power, and him whispering scripture like a man trying to bargain with the universe. Historians still argue about whether that guilt was genuine or just convenient. Maybe he truly believed he had offended heaven, or maybe he simply needed a divine excuse to chase the woman who would one day unravel him. Anne Boleyn. Either way, that's the moment the shift began. A psychological crack hidden behind all that royal bravado. Because when Henry started confusing God's will with his own desires, England began its slow march toward chaos. And yet, right now, in this golden snapshot of youth, you can almost forgive him. He laughs easily, plays tennis, rides horses at dawn. He wears his crown lightly, not yet crushed by its weight. You can smell the sweat and summer air as he gallops past, a blur of confidence and charm. He's beautiful, and he knows it. The courtiers cheer, the musicians strike their lutes, and for one fleeting second, everything seems eternal. But if you listen carefully, beneath the music, there's a tiny sound, the faint click of something inevitable, the beginning of obsession, the start of a story that will turn passion into politics and love into legend. Because every tragedy, even royal ones, always starts with a boy who thought the world would bend for his heart and a crown that made him believe it should. You follow him again, not through sunlight this time, but through a softer, more deceptive glow. The years have passed. The air feels heavier now, and so does he. His laughter has dulled. His eyes have grown suspicious, and though the banquets still sparkle, the music no longer sounds like joy. You can sense it, that strange moment when love stops being comfort and becomes calculation. Catherine of Aragon still prays for him, still wears her wedding ring, still believes in the man he once was. But Henry is already drifting towards something, or someone, that makes his pulse race again. And that someone is Anne Boleyn. You've heard her name before, of course. Everyone has. But what most people forget is how different she was from anyone else at that court. Anne wasn't a docile rose. She was the thorn that knew exactly where to press. She had just returned from the French court, worldly, clever, fluent in flirtation, the way some people are fluent in prayer. Her laugh was sharp, her mind even sharper, and her refusal to submit made her glow like a forbidden fire in Henry's eyes. You watch them meet. He's in his late 30s now, broad, powerful, restless. She's younger, magnetic, dangerous in that quiet way only confidence can be. She won't be his mistress, she says. She'll be his wife, or nothing. And in that instant you can almost hear the sound of an empire cracking, not from war, but from desire. It's easy to forget how revolutionary that defiance was. In a world where women were meant to obey, Anne told a king no, and Henry, who had conquered France's armies and bent bishops to his will, found himself undone by a single word: no. You can see him lying awake at night, replaying her smile, imagining her voice, convincing himself that this obsession is divine destiny. You know that feeling? When the thing you can't have starts to feel sacred. It's not love anymore, it's theology with better lighting. Here's the official version. Henry petitioned the Pope for an annulment, claiming that his marriage to Catherine was invalid in the eyes of God. He cited that verse again, the one from Leviticus about a man who marries his brother's widow being cursed. But really, you can feel what's happening. This isn't about sin, it's about ego. The church said no, the Pope stalled, and Henry, in all his royal arrogance, decided that if God's spokesman on earth wouldn't agree with him, he'd just replace him. And that's exactly what he did. He broke England from Rome, declared himself head of the church, and rewrote the rules of heaven to fit the shape of his desire. You almost want to clap. Not because it's noble, but because it's so breathtakingly human. The entire English Reformation, that massive historical earthquake that would change Europe forever, was born not just from politics or faith, but from the quiet humiliation of a man who couldn't get what he wanted. Still, there's a peculiar detail you probably didn't learn in school. When Henry finally married Anne, he threw one of the grandest celebrations in Tudor memory, yet London's streets were eerily silent. People didn't cheer. They whispered, they muttered. To them, Anne wasn't a queen. She was the reason their world had been turned upside down. Bread prices soared, priests fled, families were divided. And in the royal bedchamber where Henry imagined peace, there was only tension. Anne was passionate, yes, but also proud, jealous, and clever enough to know that his love was as unstable as his temper. Some historians still argue about what Anne really felt. Was she ever truly in love with Henry, or just intoxicated by the impossible idea of power? Some see her as a manipulator, the woman who brought down a kingdom with her ambition. Others see her as a victim, a bright, intelligent woman crushed by a system that would never let her win. Maybe she was both. Maybe that's what makes her story so haunting. You picture her walking through the corridors, her black hair gleaming in candlelight, her dress whispering against the stone floors. There's always someone watching, always someone taking notes, because court life is half theater, half trap. Every smile could be treason. Every compliment could be a weapon. Anne moves through it all like she knows the game but refuses to play gently. She wants to be queen, and when she gets it, the crown fits like a victory and a curse all at once. For a moment, it works. The kingdom bends. The court rejoices, and Henry finally has what he wanted. He calls her the jewel of his heart. He swears their love is eternal. But you know how desire works. It burns too brightly to last. The longer you stare into the flame, the more it blinds you. Soon, Anne's intelligence starts to irritate him. Her wit becomes insolence. Her independence becomes threat. And then, the cruelest twist, she gives birth not to a son, but to a daughter. Elizabeth, the child who will one day outshine them both. You want to tell her, to whisper through time, that her daughter will rule longer, wiser, stronger than any king of her blood. But Anne can't see that future. All she sees is Henry's disappointment. The way his eyes shift. The way the warmth drains out of a room when power meets reality. There's another odd little fact, one that historians can't quite agree on. Some say that after Elizabeth's birth, Anne suffered several miscarriages, one possibly of a deformed fetus. Others insist that rumor was propaganda, spread by her enemies to paint her as cursed. Even now, scholars argue whether it was biology or betrayal that ended her reign. What everyone agrees on is that within 3 short years of marriage, the woman who once brought a king to his knees would kneel for the last time, not in prayer, but before an executioner. But that night is still far away. Right now, as you stand in the dim candlelight of her chamber, she's still alive, still luminous, still believing that she can hold his love together through sheer force of will. You can smell the lavender she keeps beside her bed, the faint perfume of rosewater masking the ache of fear. Outside, the wind hums softly through the palace windows, and somewhere down the hall, Henry's footsteps echo, slow, deliberate, dangerous. And in that moment, as the shadows stretch long across the stone, you realize something Henry never did. Love isn't a crown. It doesn't glitter. It doesn't obey. And the second you try to make it kneel, it disappears, quietly, like smoke slipping out between your fingers. You hear those footsteps again, slow, uneven, echoing through the stone corridors of Whitehall. They don't sound like the march of a king anymore. They sound like the pacing of a man who's begun to doubt the very air he breathes. You follow him, quietly down the hall, past the tapestries of hunting scenes and painted angels that never blink. The air feels charged, like before a storm. Anne is in her chamber, pale, exhausted, clutching a letter that will never reach him. Henry doesn't come to her anymore. Not really. When he enters, he brings the weight of his disappointment with him, the kind that fills a room before words even start. You can almost feel it, that invisible pressure that turns silence into punishment. The court has started whispering. Courtiers have begun to turn their eyes away when Anne passes. And you know how that feels, don't you? When once they adored you, but now they bow too quickly, or not at all. There's a chill in the air, part superstition, part politics. You can sense it moving between them like a ghost neither wants to name. For Anne, every gesture becomes survival. Every word has to be rehearsed, polished, careful not to draw the blade closer. For Henry, every breath she takes feels like defiance. What started as passion is now paranoia, and what was once love has become a mirror he can no longer bear to face. It's strange how fear makes people rewrite history before it's even over. One rumor begins, a flirtation, a careless laugh, a glance that lasts too long, and suddenly Anne's every gesture becomes evidence. The court becomes a theater of whispers. The courtiers, who once toasted her name, now sharpen their knives behind smiles. Somewhere, the king's advisors feed the fire. She bewitched you, they say. She mocks your manhood, they whisper. Henry listens. He wants to believe them. It's easier than believing he was wrong. And here's the eerie part. Historians still can't agree on what was real. Did Anne ever betray him? Did she ever even have the chance? There's no proof, only accusations, one from a musician, one from her own brother. It feels like a nightmare in slow motion. Letters burned, servants questioned, the court suddenly colder than stone. Anne stands before them all, refusing to beg, refusing to confess. You almost want to reach through time, to tell her that dignity won't save her, but she already knows. In May of 1536, she's imprisoned in the Tower of London, the same tower where she once watched her coronation procession pass below. You can picture her looking out through the barred window, the city spread out like a map. She'll never walk again. The air smells of damp earth and iron. At night, she hears the river, the slow lap of water against the stones. Steady as a heartbeat, the guards avoid her eyes. Even the ravens seem quieter. On the morning of May 19th, the sky is strangely clear. She walks to the scaffold in a gray gown and a white coif, her hair tucked neatly beneath it. There are no tears, no screams, only the sound of her steps on the wooden boards. The French executioner bows. She thanks him, calmly. And here's something you may not know. Henry ordered a swordsman from Calais instead of the usual English axe. It was faster, cleaner, less messy. Some say it was a final gesture of mercy. Others say it was vanity. He wanted her death to be elegant. Even now, historians debate whether it was guilt or pride that made him choose the sword. The blade falls, quick and silent. For a moment, the crowd doesn't move. The air holds its breath. And then, just like that, the woman who changed the course of an empire is gone. Her body buried in an unmarked grave within the tower. Her ghost, though, well, that's another story. Visitors still claim to see her walking the corridors in the moonlight, holding her head gently in her hands, her gown whispering against the stone. But you know what's stranger? The next day, Henry dresses in white and rides to meet Jane Seymour, the quiet lady in waiting who had been standing in Anne's shadow all along. The transition is so swift it almost feels unreal. One queen dies, another rises, and the court exhales as if it's just witnessed weather, not tragedy. You watch him, his face unreadable, his laughter loud again, as if sound alone could drown guilt. It's almost cinematic, a clean cut between scenes. Still, something about him has changed. His smile doesn't reach his eyes anymore. The golden boy of England is fading. The lines on his face are deepening, and the first cracks of age are forming beneath his armor. You can tell he feels it too, that creeping sense that time, like love, can't be ordered around. And Jane Seymour is the opposite of Anne in every way, soft, devout, obedient. She doesn't challenge him, she soothes him. She's like warm milk after a long night of nightmares, the perfect antidote to the woman who burned too brightly. But deep down, you can feel it. Henry isn't healed. He's just quiet, the kind of quiet that comes right before thunder. When Jane gives birth to his long-awaited son, Edward, the court erupts in joy. Bells ring, feasts overflow. Henry weeps openly, thanking God for answering his prayers. You almost want to believe it's redemption, that the story might finally settle. But 3 days later, Jane dies of infection, and this time the silence in the palace is different. It's not political, it's personal. For once, the grief seems real. If you stand outside Hampton Court at dusk, you can still imagine him there, the mighty king, leaning against a window, his reflection barely human in the glass. The world calls him victorious, the church calls him divine. But you know better. He looks tired. His eyes flicker like the last flame of a candle burning too long. Around him, the ghosts of 2 queens keep their distance, patient, watching, because they know this story isn't finished, not yet. You stand with him again, years later, in a room that smells faintly of musk, wine, and something gone stale, like a memory that's been opened too many times. The golden boy of England is gone now. What's left is a man padded with indulgence and regret, the sparkle dulled behind eyes that no longer look outward. His hair is thinned, his leg wound festers, and when he moves, the effort makes him wince. But power still clings to him like perfume, even when the scent turns sour. Jane Seymour is gone. The son she left him is frail, coughing through the corridors of time, too fragile to ever fill the echo his father wanted him to. And Henry, well, Henry is lonely again. Not the lonely that comes from being alone, but the kind that blooms when you realize people stay because they must, not because they wish to. The court around him has learned to tiptoe. Everyone smiles too wide, laughs too quickly, watches too carefully. You can feel it, that thick, invisible air that builds around tyrants when no one dares to speak first. Henry wants companionship again, something safe, something that doesn't challenge or ignite him. And that's how Anne of Cleves enters the story, through a painting of all things. You might have heard the tale, a diplomatic marriage carefully arranged through portraits. Henry sends his favorite artist Hans Holbein to capture her likeness. The portrait returns, delicate, poised, with eyes that seem soft and kind. Henry is enchanted. From the moment he sees the painting, he calls her his Flemish mare, which, let's be honest, doesn't sound romantic but was, for him, a term of endearment. The marriage is arranged, treaties signed, politics polished. He's convinced this will be simple, strategic, and civilized. But here's where the story gets awkward. When Anne finally arrives in England, Henry rides out to greet her in disguise. He loves theatrical gestures, remember? It's supposed to be a romantic surprise. He'll appear, she'll recognize him instinctively. Their love will be divine. Except, it doesn't go that way. She doesn't recognize him at all. Worse, she's unimpressed. When he throws off his cloak, expecting gasps and awe, she just looks mildly confused. That silence, that one heartbeat where she didn't swoon. It's like watching a balloon deflate. You can practically hear his ego hitting the floor. When he meets her properly later, he claims she's nothing like her picture. Historians still debate whether that was true, whether Holbein's portrait flattered her, or whether Henry's pride couldn't handle being unrecognized. Either way, the poor woman never stood a chance. The marriage is arranged, the ceremony performed, but within days, Henry is complaining that he can't fulfill his husbandly duties. "I like her not," he tells his advisors, perhaps the most understated rejection in royal history. What's strange is that Anne of Cleves doesn't fight back. She doesn't rage or plead. She just smiles, accepts it. Maybe she's smart enough to see the danger in a wounded king. Maybe she knows survival sometimes means surrender. The marriage is annulled on the grounds of non-consummation, and she agrees so gracefully that Henry rewards her with wealth, property, and the title the king's sister. Of all his wives, Anne of Cleves ends up with the happiest ending and the longest life. She outlives him, outlives his son, even outlives the next 3 queens. You can almost picture her years later, sipping wine in her country estate, watching the sun set, thinking, "I dodged an absolute storm." There's something quietly satisfying about that. The only woman who walked away from Henry alive and content. But back at court, the king doesn't rest for long. He's restless again, nursing a bruised ego and an unhealed leg, desperate for something to remind him he's still desirable, still powerful. And that's when Catherine Howard enters. A girl so young you'd call her a child today. Barely 17, flirty, impulsive, and far too alive for a man twice her age who's already halfway between myth and ruin. When you think of her, imagine a candle burning beside an open window. Beautiful, yes, but with a flame that doesn't understand the wind. She dances at court like it's still a game, laughing too loudly, touching hands too freely, forgetting that every pair of eyes in that palace reports to the throne. Henry calls her his rose without thorns. She calls him her beloved husband. The rest of the court calls her doomed. And maybe you've seen this before, that kind of love that isn't really love, just projection wearing perfume. Henry sees youth and he calls it devotion. Catherine sees power and she calls it protection. They both mistake their fantasies for connection, and for a while, that illusion keeps them warm, but it doesn't last. Whispers start again. Late-night meetings, secret letters, laughter heard behind closed doors. The same courtiers who once cheered her now start to take notes. It's the same old dance, admiration curdling into accusation. The rumors grow teeth, and before long they reach the king's ears. You can almost feel the air thicken, the way it does when someone opens a door to bad news. When Henry hears the first report, he doesn't speak. He just stares at the messenger, the silence stretching long enough to make everyone in the room sweat. Then, slowly, he stands. His face goes pale, and his hand, the one that once held Anne's letter, Jane's promise, clenches. He doesn't rage immediately. That's the worst part. He just closes off, like a curtain drawn over a storm. Catherine is arrested. The corridors echo again, the same footsteps, the same dread. They say she screamed when they dragged her away, begging to see him, to explain, and somewhere in the cold heart of Hampton Court she runs, barefoot, desperate, down the gallery that still bears her name. You can almost hear her steps if you listen long enough, a frantic rhythm of youth colliding with consequence. Even now, visitors claim they hear her cries in that hallway at night, a soft, ghostly sound that fades when you turn your head. Some say it's guilt echoing through the centuries, others call it justice. Historians still debate whether she was truly guilty of adultery or just careless, naive, doomed by the same charm that once saved her. But it doesn't really matter anymore. Henry signs her death warrant with a trembling hand. She's gone before winter ends. And so, once again, the palace falls quiet. Another queen erased, another chapter closed. But if you linger long enough, if you stand in that same corridor with the faint draft brushing your skin, you'll realize something. It's not Catherine's ghost haunting that place. It's his. Henry. Forever pacing, forever chasing something that power could never give him. Tenderness without fear. You can almost feel the years pressing down now. Thick, heavy, and slow like candle wax pooling on the table. The great Henry VIII no longer looks like a god dressed in velvet and gold. He looks like a man who's outlived all his own illusions. The palace smells of medicine, damp wool, and something metallic, something like regret. His leg wound has worsened. It oozes and aches, and he no longer rides, no longer hunts. The armor that once gleamed on his chest now hangs on the wall like a ghost of his former body. You walk beside him, slowly, because that's all he can do these days. Every step is a negotiation between pride and pain. The courtiers still bow, still call him Your Majesty, still flatter him. But you can sense it. They pity him. And pity, for a man like Henry, is more unbearable than pain. He's still king, yes, but the mirror tells another story. The strong jaw has softened, the eyes are tired, the smile forced. The man who once commanded God to rearrange heaven for him now fears eternity's silence. And yet, even in this decay, life stirs one last time. Her name is Catherine Parr. The final queen, the last woman who dares to walk beside the storm instead of running from it. She's different, calm, intelligent, mature. She reads, debates theology, and writes about faith in a way that feels sincere, not manipulative. When she enters a room, the air steadies. Even Henry, old and bitter, straightens up a little, as if trying to remember what dignity feels like. At first, you might think she's merely another caretaker, and yes, she does tend to him, brings him comfort, tends to his swollen legs, soothes the tremors in his temper. But Catherine Parr has a kind of quiet strength that no executioner can touch. She doesn't seduce him, she teaches him. And somehow, that's more dangerous. She brings books into the palace, real books, printed with questions that make priests nervous. Henry likes that she reads, likes that she speaks softly about God in a way that sounds like forgiveness. But not everyone approves. The old men of his council, the ones who have survived longer than truth, start whispering again. She's too clever, they say, too Protestant, too bold. You can almost hear the gears of politics turning, grinding against her calm. There's a strange irony in this. The man who once tore England from Rome for a woman now almost executes another for reading the Bible in English. You watch him at dinner one evening, the firelight flickering against the gold of his cup, his eyes distant. He loves her, or at least he wants to. But love has always been complicated for him. It tastes too much like power, and power always goes bitter in his mouth. One evening he signs a warrant for her arrest. He's persuaded that she's a heretic, a woman leading him astray from the true faith. The guards are ordered to take her to the tower the next day. You can imagine her learning of it, the papers still wet with ink, her pulse steady but her hands trembling just slightly. She doesn't plead, she waits. And when Henry comes to her that night, expecting fear, expecting submission, she surprises him. She kneels, yes, but not in defeat, in quiet control. "My lord," she says softly, "I spoke of Scripture not to challenge your wisdom, but to comfort you. I thought it might ease your suffering." For a long moment, he says nothing. The fire pops. His face shifts. Pride, confusion, then something fragile beneath it. Something dangerously close to remorse. He tears up the warrant. The next morning, the guards are told to stand down. Catherine Parr becomes the only woman who ever talked her way out of the tower before she entered it. Joseph Perel lives up to it. Historians still debate what she truly felt for him. Was it love? Duty? Strategy? Maybe all three. She stayed with him until the end, long after most people had stopped believing the man inside the crown still existed. She sat by his bedside when his breath turned shallow, when even his confessor grew afraid to speak. She read to him in a low voice, verses about forgiveness, about mercy, about the peace that comes after surrender. And in those final weeks, when the noise of the court faded and the corridors went still, Henry began to dream again. Or maybe remember. Servants claimed they'd find him murmuring in his sleep, calling names: Anne, Jane, Mary. He never said which one he saw, but they say his face looked softer, almost boyish, as if time itself had briefly forgiven him. You stand there now, near the bed where he's dying. The air smells of candle smoke and lavender oil. The tapestries hang motionless, the windows shuttered against the winter wind. His breath rattles. The crown, that heavy cursed thing, sits nearby, gleaming faintly in the half-light. It's strange how quiet death always is, especially for men who spent their whole lives making noise. When the final breath leaves him, there is no thunder, no omen, no choir of angels, just a long, aching silence. The courtiers step back. Someone closes his eyes, someone else begins to weep, and you can almost hear the whisper that moves through the palace like a sigh. It's over. But you know it isn't, because ghosts don't care about coronations or successions. They stay where the feelings were strongest. Hampton Court still hums with him, his pride, his grief, his longing. The corridors remember his laughter, his rage, his endless search for a love that didn't hurt. And sometimes, if you walk those halls alone, the air will shift. A door might creak open, a candle might tremble. You might feel it, not fear, not quite, but recognition. The echo of a man who mistook love for power and found too late that they were never the same thing. You linger there in the hush that follows his final breath. The courtiers have left, the priests have whispered their Latin, and the servants move like ghosts themselves, folding linens, dimming candles, pretending they can tidy away the presence of a man who refused to be small. The room feels swollen with silence. You can hear the faint tap of wax dripping from a candle, the soft creak of the rafters as the winter air presses against the roof, and under it all something else. A pulse, not quite sound, not quite memory. You move closer to his bed. The sheets are damp with sweat, and the heavy scent of rosemary and death oil clings to everything. There's an odd peace on his face, almost defiant, as if even now he's negotiating with heaven. Someone has placed a crucifix on his chest. The chain glints in the candlelight. His hand, huge and ringed with gold, rests beside it, fingers slightly curled as though he might still reach for something. When they finally carry him out, the procession moves slowly through the palace, down corridors he once filled with music and arguments and laughter. People bow as he passes, but it feels more like habit than devotion. A few cross themselves. A few whisper that he'll find no rest. It's strange, isn't it? The way even in death, power refuses to let go quietly. Outside, the January air bites sharp. The sky is low and heavy with clouds, the kind that promise snow but never deliver it. The coffin, enormous, draped in black velvet, is drawn by horses toward Windsor. They say that as the procession passed through Sion Abbey, the coffin cracked and blood leaked from within, seeping out onto the stones. The monks called it an omen, divine justice. Others said it was simply the work of time and temperature. Historians still argue over whether it really happened at all. But you can picture it, can't you? That deep red stain spreading through the white frost, like history leaving its mark one last time. And yet, for all the rumors and grandeur, his end is painfully human. He dies afraid, not of judgment, but of being forgotten. You can feel it in the way his tomb was designed, colossal, crowded with angels and trophies, a monument built not to faith but to memory. It was never finished. Even his grave, like his heart, remained incomplete. Catherine Parr outlives him. She remarries, briefly, finds love again, and dies giving birth to another man's child. Jane Seymour's son, the long-awaited Edward, will become king, but barely survive adolescence. Mary, Catherine's daughter, will rise to the throne and earn the name Bloody. And Anne's daughter Elizabeth, the child he once saw as a disappointment, will become the greatest monarch England has ever known. History has a dark sense of humor that way. You realize, as you walk through the empty halls of Hampton Court, that Henry's story never really ended with his death. It unraveled forward, through generations, a curse disguised as legacy. Every decision he made, every love he destroyed, echoes through the bloodlines that followed. It's like he carved his own ghost into the kingdom's bones. You can still feel it in the stone beneath your feet, that faint vibration of ego, desire, and divine delusion. The portraits remain, of course, his face multiplied across the palace walls, watching, the same steady stare, the same impossible confidence. But look closer. In the paint, the cracks have started to show. Tiny lines across the surface, spider-webbing through his likeness, like time whispering its own judgment. You wonder if, somewhere in the flicker between shadow and light, the man inside the paint knows how it all ended. Sometimes, when the palace is empty, the guards say they hear music. Soft, distant, a lute strumming from nowhere. Sometimes they smell roses in rooms long abandoned, and in the long hallway leading to the chapel, footsteps echo after midnight, too heavy to belong to the living. You can almost picture him there, older, limping, still trying to follow the sound of something he lost long ago. He ruled for nearly 4 decades, 6 wives, 2 religions, thousands of executions, and yet, in the quiet, none of that matters. What lingers isn't his power or his laws or even his conquests. It's the loneliness, the endless search for control in a world that refused to stay still. He wanted to command love, but love, like faith, never obeys the crown. You look around the room one last time. The candles have burned low, their light trembling against the walls. The air feels colder now, though maybe that's just the absence of him, of the noise, the hunger, the heat of a man who believed he could bend God to his will. Outside, the first flakes of snow begin to fall, soft and slow, covering the courtyards where he once walked. And somewhere, in the vast quiet between the ticking of centuries, a voice seems to whisper, not in anger, but in weary understanding. Power fades, names fade, but love endures even when it's buried beneath the crown. The echo fades, and for a long moment there is nothing. Only the sigh of wind through the ancient stones and the gentle heartbeat of history, still trying to forgive itself. The snow keeps falling, softer now, melting on the windowsills of Hampton Court where candlelight still flickers through the glass. The palace is quieter than it's ever been, but not empty. Silence here isn't absence, it's memory pretending to rest. You can feel it, can't you? The kind of silence that listens back. You wander down the long gallery, your footsteps swallowed by the velvet dark. The tapestries ripple slightly, though no wind moves them. The air smells faintly of beeswax, old wood, and something sweet, like crushed flowers left too long in a vase. Somewhere behind you a door creaks shut. Somewhere above, a clock ticks without rhythm. And suddenly, the line between history and haunting begins to blur. People say Henry never truly left Hampton Court. Maybe it's the weight of what happened here. The weddings, the births, the betrayals. Maybe it's because this was the only place he ever felt both adored and afraid. Or maybe it's simply what happens when a soul spends too many years believing that love was another kind of throne. You turn the corner, and the gallery stretches before you, long, endless, flickering with candlelight that wasn't there a moment ago. The portraits seem to breathe. Henry's eyes in them glint just slightly, as if the paint has remembered how to live. You think you see movement, a shadow crossing behind the pillars, then another, and then, faintly, the rustle of silk. You're not alone. A woman's figure glides past, pale as moonlight, her gown whispering against the floor. She doesn't look at you. Her head is bowed, her hands clasped. The scent of lavender trails behind her, sharp, almost metallic. You know her face, Anne Boleyn. Her eyes are downcast, her expression calm, but her neck is bare, smooth where a line of red should be. She stops beneath her portrait, raises her gaze, and for a fleeting moment, she seems almost amused. Then she vanishes, like breath on cold glass. Another figure appears further down the hall, gentler this time, holding something in her arms. It's Jane Seymour, her ghost forever cradling a baby that never grew old enough to know his father. Her smile is sad, but peaceful. She moves through the wall as though it were a curtain, leaving behind a faint shimmer of light. You wait, listening. The gallery feels crowded now, filled not with the living but with memory taking form. The sound of footsteps follows, heavier, slower, dragging. Then, unmistakably, his voice, low, weary, carrying that old arrogance dulled by something like remorse. "Catherine!" The word stretches through the air, half plea, half command. You can almost see him, broad, imposing, leaning on his cane, his face worn but proud. His eyes search the darkness, expecting her to appear. But the ghosts don't come for him anymore. They linger, yes, but they keep their distance. Love, it seems, still knows how to hide. It's strange how the living always want neat endings. We like to believe that ghosts fade when the story's done, that justice ties everything up with a ribbon. But in this palace, nothing ever ends cleanly. The laughter, the prayers, the screams, they're all stitched into the walls like threads in an old tapestry. History doesn't die here. It dreams. You reach the chapel royal, and the air grows colder. The light is thin, bluish, as if the moon itself has crept inside to listen. The pews are empty. The altar gleams faintly, silver catching the dark. And there, faint but certain, you hear it, the hum of a hymn. Not loud, not mournful, just a single voice, humming under its breath, somewhere near the pulpit. You sit down, letting the sound wash over you. It's soothing, almost hypnotic, the kind of melody that feels older than language. You close your eyes, the notes fade. When you open them again, the chapel is still. The air feels heavy, but calm. Maybe it was just the wind. Maybe it was something else. As you rise to leave, you catch one last glimpse of the royal crest above the door. The letters H and A intertwined. Henry and Anne. He had it carved when he still believed their love was eternal. After her death, he tried to have it removed, but the stone refused to let go. Even now the mark remains, faint but stubborn, a memory that outlasted the man who made it. Outside, dawn begins to break. The first light spills across the Thames, pale and hesitant, touching the palace roofs with a color somewhere between gold and ash. The city wakes, the birds stir, the ghosts retreat into the walls, and for a moment, it almost feels like peace. You take one last look at Hampton Court before walking away. Behind those walls lies the story of a man who could command nations but never himself. A man who mistook love for power and ended up worshipping his own reflection. And as the morning wind brushes your face, you realize something simple, something soft, something true. In the end, even kings fade into whispers. But the whispers, the ones about love, pride, and the fragile humanity hiding beneath the crown, those never fade at all. You walk farther along the riverbank, the cold air brushing against your skin like the breath of the centuries. The palace sits behind you now, its towers dissolving in the mist. But it doesn't feel gone. It follows, the way certain memories do. Quiet, but insistent. The Thames moves slowly, carrying fragments of reflection across its dark surface. A flash of candlelight, the curve of a crown, the faint shimmer of a face that might have been yours, if you had lived another life, in another century. You stop for a moment, listening to the water. The sound is the same one Henry must have heard when he was still alive, that eternal murmur of something bigger than all his proclamations. He believed he could command England, command God, even command love. But the river never obeyed him. It kept flowing. That's the irony, isn't it? The world outlasts even its loudest kings. As the morning widens, London begins to stir. Horses clop on cobblestones. A baker opens his shutters. A child laughs. None of them are thinking about Henry VIII. They have rent to pay, bread to bake, lives to live. You smile, just a little, because that's what history really is. Not a collection of dates, but the quiet fact that the living always keep going. Still, part of you wonders what became of him after death. Not the body in the tomb, but the man beneath the myths. Some say his soul never found rest, that it wanders through the corridors of power he once built, watching the world change and realizing it no longer belongs to him. Others say he was forgiven, that in whatever place souls go, he finally met those he wronged, and for the first time listened instead of commanding. You imagine that meeting. Anne, calm and luminous, no longer afraid. Jane, gentle as always, holding their son who never grew old. Mary and Elizabeth beside her, the two daughters who carried his contradictions like inheritance. And Henry, humbled, uncertain, reaching out the way a man does when the noise has finally stopped. Maybe that's what peace is, the moment you stop trying to be a god and remember how to be human again. A breeze moves across the river, cold and clean. You close your eyes, and for an instant you can almost hear them, the voices of all 6 women, their laughter threaded with sorrow, rising like a hymn from the water, not forgiving exactly, but remembering. You turn back toward the palace one last time. The sun is climbing now, washing the red brick in a soft, forgiving light. The banners hang still. The windows gleam. From here, it looks almost alive again. Almost. And as you walk away, the story settles around you like a blanket, warm, heavy, familiar. You think about how every love, every cruelty, every choice Henry ever made began from the same fragile place. All human stories begin. The wish to be seen, to be chosen, to matter. The Thames keeps whispering, the city hums awake, and you realize perhaps the only true crown any of us ever wear is memory. Because long after the gold fades, after the portraits crack and the monuments crumble, what remains isn't power. It's the echo of our voices in someone else's night, and the stories that, centuries later, still refuse to die. And now, as the last ripples of the river dissolve into silence, you feel the story exhale, like the palace itself has finally gone still. The ghosts have retreated into their portraits, the candles have burned to pools of wax, and the air has softened back into ordinary time. Henry's name remains, of course. It always will. But the man behind the crown, he's quieter now. You can almost sense him letting go. Of pride, of fear, of the endless need to be remembered. Maybe that's the real ending, not the thunder of history, but the small, private surrender no one writes down. The truth that love and power were never enemies. He just never learned how to tell them apart. His wives, his faith, his kingdom, they were all mirrors, each one showing him the thing he refused to see. That to rule others is easy, to rule oneself is a lifetime's work. The wind shifts through the bare trees by the river, carrying the faint smell of rain and stone. The water glows silver under the fading sun, and for a heartbeat you could swear you see a reflection in it. Broad shoulders, tired eyes, a face both proud and uncertain, and then it's gone, swallowed by the current, leaving only the sound of the world moving forward. You take a breath, slow and deep. The story has ended, but it hasn't really gone. It's just changed shape, the way all old stories do. It lingers in the hush between thoughts, in the warmth of candlelight against the dark, in the quiet reminder that even kings, even gods of their own making, are still human underneath the crown. So tonight, as you drift towards sleep, let that truth settle somewhere inside you. Power fades, names fade, even the walls of palaces crumble. But the longing to love and to be loved, even imperfectly, is the one thing that outlives us all. Now close your eyes. Let the river carry what's left of this story, and listen just for a moment to the silence where Henry once dreamed.